Okay, so I think the speakers today are very well known, at least in the Cosmos ecosystem. So I'll just introduce them very quickly. We have Sonny from Osmosis, we have Akash from Evmos, we have Rebecca from SAGA, and Zaki from Inclusion and Sommelier. So everyone is building in the Cosmos ecosystem, so I'm guessing the title of the panel is The Outlook for Cosmos. I'm sure everyone thinks it's very bright. So I'd rather take like the other side of this and see what are the problems and issues we have in the Cosmos ecosystem for this year. So let's start with you, Sonny. Say you have a young team from Berkeley, randomly, that asks you, should I build in the Cosmos ecosystem? How would you convince them not to build in the Cosmos ecosystem? Send them somewhere else.
I think the biggest reasons to not build on the Cosmos ecosystem is, I think the stack is still definitely much newer than the EVM, right? Like I've always been a EVM long-term skeptic, but like short-term, it has the most developer tooling, the most documentation, and it's just easy to get started with and deploy something very fast. And I think that it's provided a really good platform for bootstrapping and just getting to market as fast as possible. I think Cosmos teams, projects usually take much longer to get to market. I mean, Osmosis, we were able to do it in 6 months, but it's also because we had been working on the stack for 3 years prior to that.
Try this in 3 months, I think.
That's true, yeah, and I do think that it's getting better. I think that I've actually liked that I've seen more projects shift towards writing primarily in CosmWasm rather than in the SDK, and really treating the SDK as kernel level code. And so, I mean, we've been working tirelessly to help improve this. Our team has been building a lot of developer tooling for CosmWasm. We have Beaker, which is hard hat for CosmWasm, or TestTube, which is a testing framework. So it's getting better, but I think that is definitely probably one of the biggest still things we have yet a long way to go to solve.
Right. Zaki, can you give a counter argument to this? Can you take down Sonny?
Well, I mean, I think one of the other generally big challenges for Cosmos, for projects that would consider Cosmos, is that there is definitely a lack of liquidity in the ecosystem, right? In comparison to the EVM ecosystems that are out there, it's the TVLs, accessible value for DeFi, ease of onboarding stablecoins, all of these things are huge pain points for projects that are building in Cosmos. I think that would probably be one of them. And then the other sort of weak point of Cosmos that is we just don't have the wallet install base of Solana or MetaMask, and a large factor in that is the fact that we just don't have anything in sort of the NFT entertainment space that is has product market fit.
Yeah. So I guess for you, Akash, the lethal weapon of the Cosmos ecosystem is IBC, right? Now, people are hopeful that IBC is going to go across all the other crypto ecosystem. We see that on Polkadot, we see that on Near. We're getting these connections. Can you make the argument that this is not going to happen? That someone else, maybe XLR, maybe someone else, is going to take that spot, and IBC is not going to get wide adoption?
Yeah, I think when it comes to having Axelar versus IBC versus trustless bridging Succinct and all these other options, I don't think that I do imagine a world where we're going to converge on one standard. I think everyone's kind of working towards this convergence. That's how I see the competition as sort of developing. IBC is really just a way of standardizing a solution, right? And I see Axelar in line with this ethos, generally speaking, for example, that it's important to be flexible about what standards you should have. And so I wouldn't say that IBC is going to get killed by something, or other protocols might get killed by something, but I do think that they're going to evolve and they're going to adapt. And the ones that do evolve and adapt, those are the ones that are going to stick around. And there's ways for these standards to all be compatible with each other in the end, I think.
Rebecca, do you have anything to add to why IBC is going to fail miserably?
I don't think it's going to fail miserably. I do think that if you try to sell IBC as IBC, if you try to sell it as cross-chain communication, you will get an allergic reaction from a lot of other ecosystems because the feeling for them is it's still a nascent space in which to play. Why is it that Cosmos, yes, it's been working on cross-chain communication for a long time. IBC is probably the most battle-tested and robust of all the protocols out there to handle this sort of functionality. But why is it that they have declared themselves the winner? And I find that in our conversations with other ecosystems, attacking it directly like that is probably not the most effective way to do it. What has been effective, on the other hand, is Cosmos just undebatably has value add to other ecosystems that they just are not going to be able to develop for themselves anytime soon. I think that Cosmos was early to the appchain thesis, to multi-chain, all these buzzwords that we hear so much about now. And other ecosystems are trying to imitate that, whether for scaling purposes or because they know that their applications, once they grow to a certain size, are going to have to get onto their own dedicated block space. Now they're trying to climb that mountain themselves. Cosmos has already scaled so much of that mountain itself. And to be able to provide that kind of infrastructure and knowledge and value add to those ecosystems, the price of the ticket of admission really is IBC. That's how we communicate with infrastructure that has already been built on Cosmos, can be very valuable for other ecosystems, multi-chain ambitions. And again, the way that we can transfer what we know and what we have built to you is through IBC. So no, I don't think it's going to fail miserably.
I have a general question for the panel, which is what would you define as IBC? Where do you draw the lines on what IBC really is?
Zaki, you want to take this one?
So I think the sort of core thesis. So I'd say there's two. There's one is there's the principle of IBC, which is that there should be no central point of failure. So where you think about I differentiate IBC from, let's say, Axelar, is Axelar does have one blockchain that is a control plane of all the interchain messages, and if that blockchain were to fail, it would bring the whole that whole network down. Whereas in IBC we isolate failures. So there's the principle, and then the other principle is permissionless connectivity. So you don't have to do business development with anyone to connect to the IBC network. You just connect. Then there's a bunch of, I think, very well designed software abstractions that were built, and those software abstractions allow for layering protocols and building applications on top of those protocols in a way that's really dynamic. Those are, I think, the pieces that make IBC, and probably the one that has, I think, the least, let's say, sort of enthusiastic adoption by the multi-chain industry is the last piece, picking up the absorbing the particular set of abstractions that we chose for IBC.
Sunny, you with that understanding of IBC, can you explain maybe a little technical here why specifically Ethereum and other EVM haven't been adopted IBC yet? What needs to be done for that to happen?
So for Ethereum specifically, so the thing with I guess the difference between IBC as implemented right now versus most bridging solutions, including things like Axelar, is they work at the application, at the VM level, at the state machine level, while IBC really works at the consensus level. It uses actual light client proofs, while something like Axelar, it doesn't actually care what the consensus protocol is. It just, because what they do is they just have Axelar validators running the full nodes for the chains, right? But which is what makes it permissioned as opposed to fully permissionless. And so the problem is that the things Axelar can scale much faster to many chains because many chains have like an EVM, but like a lot of these EVM chains all have like completely different consensus protocols. Avalanche has a completely different consensus protocol than Ethereum, like pre-merge Ethereum did, than Polygon does, and having to write like clients for every single one of these is actually takes quite a bit of work, and so I think that's been one of the main reasons that one of the main trade-offs there. And so I think that, so what was the original question exactly?
I wanted to get a sense of what needs to be done for IBC to be enabled on Ethereum.
So I think like for Ethereum specifically, I think now there are people actually working on it, right? Like I think it wasn't worth the time to do until the merge happened, because we were all under this impression that like, hey, the consensus protocol for Ethereum is actually going to change, and so building a light client solution system and especially like building IBC for like not chains without finality, like proof of work had, was kind of annoying. So now that ETH 2.0 exists and we have like the proof of stake system, there are like more teams than I actually can count, or not can count, but like more teams that I'm aware of that like are actually building IBC implementations for Ethereum. Mm. But once again, the point is that like just because it's built for Ethereum, that doesn't mean it'll automatically work for Avalanche or Polygon.
Yeah, needs to be done one by one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of like challengers for the Cosmos SDK, I think that's a question for Zaki. You've been checking that out. Is there anything out there that competes with the Cosmos SDK that is an option right now, or maybe an option soon enough?
Well, so like in the beginning, in 2016, 2017, there were only two contenders to building app chains. One was Substrate, and the other one was the Cosmos SDK. And for reasons that I don't really feel like I have a full appreciation for, the Cosmos SDK has been much more successful with builders than Substrate has. But now we have many teams. I've invested in and advise and work with many of them who are all building other app chain building frameworks. So you have the Hyper SDK from the Avalanche team, which was just released. You have the Optimism and the OP stack sort of concept, and then like a lot of different companies that are doing sort of variants and forks and rollups as a service. You have this idea of like EVM Plus from the Arbitrum team. You have, so many of Sovereign Labs with their like zero knowledge oriented one, and it seems like we are now like the app chain thesis has become solidified enough in people's minds that like this is actually a target to build towards, rather than really building anything other than just like an EVM. Was considered pretty heterodox, in the last cycle. And now you have both a lot of different VMs, like the Solana VM, coming to like lots of different ecosystems. So where all this nets out, I think builders have a lot of choices, and the EVM is still the rapid prototyping environment of choice.
So who would you say is the main challenger here?
The main challenger? Probably the OP stack.
That's the one Coinbase just adopted.
Yeah, Optimism stack.
Yeah.
Is the OP stack anything other than just an EVM, though?
It's not anything other than EVM, but like there's no real reason it couldn't be something other than EVM. Like I think somebody has like a Game Boy emulator running on the OP stack right now. So
So Rebecca, I think SAGA just signed a partnership with Polygon, right?
We did. Yeah.
Can you tell me like your experience working with Polygon? Like how different has it been from working with within Cosmos?
Well, very different. Polygon, I would say, is it's a crypto project. I think we're all supposed to say project nowadays when referring to any sort of crypto entity, but really it's a company. And so Polygon is centrally controlled. Everyone is either building on Polygon chain secured by Matic, or they are trying to build on supernets, which is what our partnership was about. So just TLDR is what SAGA is doing with Polygon is Polygon has their own app chain solution. It's called supernets. all these app chains, no surprise, are manually stood up. People pick their validators and try to convince those validators to secure their particular chain. And then Polygon will build a bunch of customizations on top of that. Very, very difficult process, long, long time to market. What SAGA is doing is automating all of that for them. And it is using Cosmos technology. So again, what was the price of admission? IBC. Now, in working with the Polygon team, what you find right away is they are very, very, very go-to-market driven. Everything is go-to-market driven. I would say that their technical vision is something that they come up with because they recognize that there's a need in the market, and therefore they need to fill that void with some sort of grand technical narrative. But what they're looking to do is absorb as much demand in business as there is out there for Web3. And so it's different from working with the Cosmos ecosystem. I think in Cosmos, we birth a lot of outstanding technology that is either inspiration for the tech stacks of other ecosystems, or they directly borrow from our code. But Polygon is just, they're out in the market. There isn't a single deal out there that they wouldn't look at.
Okay, so I think that's it for the negative part of Cosmos. We're gonna switch back to the positive part. Akash, so Sunny mentioned that the onboarding cost of building in Go, building in Rust, and that Solidity is much easier. And so you co-founded Evmos, so I'm guessing you are kind of a Solidity bull. But I want you to take like the counter argument to Sunny and convince Sunny that actually it's not a problem, and that everyone will end up building on the Cosmos stack or Rust or Cosmos.
Yeah, so I definitely think that the Cosmos SDK method is going to work out. Like, what I anticipate is, we're going to be writing stuff in Go. We're going to be able to write things more flexibly, and eventually, we won't have to spin out a chain for every single application module we write up, right? It should be easy to just inherit security from another chain using mesh security or replicated security in the early stages to basically make that happen. And so what I would like to see from that side is kind of validation that it actually is useful. So for example, this flexibility that you have when writing Go, is that flexibility, let's say, significantly better than having the confines of an EVM environment or a Cosmos environment, for example? And to me, that's not quite clear yet because, well, we have yet to kind of build out the technology that lets us just spin out a module as its own execution thread that exists as part of a consumer chain when it comes to replicated security or mesh security. And so where kind of the EVM typically contrasts with this is, it's a mature stack. I think right now in Cosmos, we're, I would say in the 2016, 2017 phases of seeing hey, what gets built with our stack. I think the EVM stack has been around quite long, and so we are further along in the evolution of the EVM stack. However, I think we need to extend it further to do more things, and that's where something like Evmos comes in. We're trying to build out extensions for the EVM so that you can leverage things that exist in Cosmos. So we have this kind of strong synergy with both the EVM but also with Cosmos tech.
The Evmos SDK is going to be built in Go, right?
Correct, yes. The Evmos SDK is kind of a toolkit that is, I would say, competing with OP Stack more directly because it's it's EVM focused. And so we're enabling people to basically spin out their own EVM chains this way, but also enable them to take advantage of the extensibility of Cosmos while doing so.
Yeah. Sunny, so Zaki mentioned one of the big problems is liquidity. And of course, Osmosis, that's something that you guys probably struggle with. How do you see a path to bring liquidity in Cosmos and fix that issue?
Yeah, I think one is native USDC. I think will help with stablecoin liquidity. Native, I would like to get more native other stablecoins, Tether, whatnot. I think then on top of that though, I actually think making the UX easier for people to bridge over assets. I think Axelar has made it quite like the UX actually pretty seamless of bridging over assets, especially if you're like doing it from the Osmosis website. But I think we can, continue to make that even better. Axelar just like 2 or 3 weeks ago rolled out like you don't have to deposit wrapped assets anymore. You can deposit like native ETH and Matic or AVAX or whatever. And so we're currently working on adding that to the Osmosis front end. I think that will make stuff a lot easier, making the bridging much faster. So like there's this thing that we've been collaborating on the spec of called forcall, which will make it much faster to like send assets between EVM chains and Cosmos chains without having to wait like whatever the finality period of the EVM chain is. So yeah, I think there's like a lot of things that will. I personally, I think that the key is to get the UX right, and then the liquidity will follow wherever the best UX is. Our take has always been, at Osmosis, our take has always been like build the best user experience, get the average traders coming to use that, and then the liquidity will follow the volumes.
So Zaki, there's a team that has been able to attract a lot of liquidity in Cosmos recently. Do you know who I'm talking about?
The Canto team.
Yes, the friends of Akash. So how do they do that?
I think like one of the things that I think is relevant here is like, blockchains are their own cultures and communities, right? But we're at an Interop event, right? And it's about like interoperability between these cultures and communities. And so, in many ways, what Evmos has, the difference between Evmos and Canto is the code is largely identical, but the like ethos and vibes and are born out of a subculture within Ethereum rather than a subculture within Cosmos. And it's sort of interesting to see like ethos impacting liquidity to such a great extent.
So Akash, how do you see like bringing that liquidity back into Evmos?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's 2 approaches to thinking about liquidity. One is the zero-sum approach. You're like, how do we take liquidity from other places? And the other approach is like, how do we actually create new opportunities for liquidity? And I think, at Evmos, we're thinking a lot more about the long term. We're thinking more about less so the zero-sum approach of taking existing liquidity and more so thinking about how do we actually create new opportunities for liquidity, or how do we rather incentivize people to make the new liquidity happen. We're also not really like TVL maxis at Evmos. Like I know that's kind of like a big metric for a lot of chains these days, and I think it is a good KPI to have. But my stance on sort of the interchain world is I think it's going to have more KPIs that are not TVL related, more about activity rather than liquidity being held in a certain place. Because if you look at how like replicated security or interchain security, how they're kind of doing things, like technically the TVL like sits on like the parent chain, but the consumer chains, are just interacting with it in some way. And so the question then becomes, where is actually the TVL? And so, yeah, my stance on that is like we're building for kind of a different world, one that's not necessarily just focused on TVL, but one that's more focused on like activity and movement. But also, to answer your question on how we might sort of compete with Canto more directly, I think we actually want to work together. Like that's kind of more of our stance in general on like working with.
It's a very Cosmos stance.
Yeah, well, I would say it's more of an Ethereum stance. I think Cosmos stance tends to be more factioned, or people tend to battle a bit more. But we kind of want to be more positive sum and try to work together towards something more cooperative.
Yeah, I think the bulk of the liquidity comes from institutions. And so maybe, Rebecca, I think you have experience dealing with institutions. How would you talk to them? How would you convince them to invest in Cosmos, market make in Cosmos, like do their regular Ethereum activities, but in Cosmos?
It's a great question, because I think ever since Bitcoin, honestly, and blockchain in general became a thing, let's say early 2010s, we've been going after this golden calf, if you will, of institutional buy-in, whether that is from large enterprises or from banking institutions. And SAGA is my second crypto startup. My first crypto startup, I spent a lot of time selling to these kinds of institutions. And I think the lesson learned there and what we really embody at SAGA is we want to make it as easy as possible for those institutions to ultimately build on blockchain. And so the stack has to be something that's palatable to them. And Cosmos has a lot to offer there. So if you get your own dedicated space, you can put controls on that space. If you want to, we encourage you not to, because the whole purpose of Web3 is openness and permissionlessness. But hey, if you want to start off sort of walking rather than running, that's an option in Cosmos. The interoperability is also another nice trait. And the access to other ecosystems, the fact that you're not closed off, is also something that's very attractive to these kinds of Web2 adopters, if you will. But the real lesson of the last few years is if you try to go after these sorts of institutions and enterprises head on, you are in for at least an 18-month sales cycle, which is a very long time in crypto. I mean, there'll be an entirely new stack for your ecosystem by then. So what do you want to do instead? You want to focus on winning at home. So you need to sell to a Web3 native audience first. Make your stack flexible enough such that you can sell to institutions, but be prepared to wait a very long time for them to adopt. And incidentally, when those institutions are finally seriously evaluating the options that they have for adoption or for a blockchain to pick, they are looking at overall traction in that particular ecosystem as well. The traction for them is a good signal of whether the technology there is robust, whether people who actually know something about this technology, i.e. people in Web3, trust this particular stack. And so focus on winning at home first. So I think for Cosmos, the technology is there. The technology is there. I think that if you want to make the sale to one of the institutions, you easily can get them to understand it, but to make sure that they are there to sign on the dotted line at the end of 18 months or 2 years, make sure that you win at home first.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I'm not obsessed with Canto, but for sure, like they had this initial adoption initially, and then from one day to the next, everyone was asking me about Canto, and I was thinking, check Evmos maybe, but everyone was obsessed about all these institutions. They wanted to talk about Canto, and it seemed like it's the right strategy to start with the community, the natives, and then they come. Sunny. So Zaki mentioned another blocker here is wallets. So how do we deal with that problem?
Make it so Osmosis can support MetaMask. This is something we've been working on. Like I think that when people, this kind of goes into the whole UX thing, right? Like if we want people coming in from Ethereum to start using Osmosis, the fact that you have to download a new wallet is such a big blocker. And making it so hey, how can you just use MetaMask with Osmosis? And then our take on wallets has always been to take this sort of T strategy where it's okay, let's support as many wallets as possible, but then make sure that we have the best integrations with one. So if you want the best possible experience, then you can use the one, best wallet for this use case. But let's support as many things as possible, reduce the overhead to onboarding as well. So as well with how do we get people who aren't even for Osmosis, our number one mission statement right now, I guess you could call it, is by the next bull cycle, we want to make it so that new crypto user onboarders can onboard onto Osmosis directly, not onto Coinbase. And so what are the things that we need to make that possible? You go to any Web2 app, the first thing you're supposed to do is not download a Chrome extension. And so I think we're actually trying to push towards how do we get towards wallet-less world where okay, you can start using Web2 identities. We're working with Lit protocol, which is this MPC wallet solution to be able to enable a lot of that, using a lot of the cool auth-z tricks and stuff, really making it so minimize the onboarding path that users have to take.
Zaki, you have any other ideas for the wallet section?
No, but SAGA, for instance, has been paying a lot of attention to the gaming market. I think it would be. I do think it's going to be critical for the success of Cosmos. I don't know if critical is the right word. I think it's an important path that needs to be explored. Is to explore beyond financial applications.
So what, for instance?
I don't know. Ask Rebecca.
No, I appreciate that, Zaki. Thank you. So SAGA is, for those of you who don't know, SAGA is a chain to launch chains. So we allow developers to automatically get onto their own dedicated chain. Anyone can benefit from this sort of infrastructure, but the reason why we decided to start with gaming and entertainment is this is where it is urgently needed. In gaming and entertainment, it is not about the financial return, it's about having fun. So you need a very high performance, controllable environment in which to deploy your game or your NFT project. And so to date, SAGA has 130 projects building on us. We average about 55 projects per quarter. By the time we launch mainnet, Q3, Q4 of this year, we're looking at 300 new projects. And this is one of the major contributions that we hope to make to the Cosmos ecosystem, is that we bring all of this gaming and the NFT projects from other ecosystems, as well as birth new projects. Because you're right, Zaki, that when it comes to the daily active users who are using those wallets, holding assets in those wallets, really a huge part of it is that cultural piece in the NFTs and in the daily usage of those applications. So that's why we've decided to focus on these sectors.
Okay, I think we're good.
Sweet,
So
thanks.
We just leave.